David Adams here, the voice of the ring, and the following is a presentation of the Mancast Network podcast for the man in all of us.
Hey guys, it's the Princess of Pro Wrestling, SoCal Val from Fight TV, and you're watching Opinion City on the Mancast Network, and I am a proud Opinion City girl.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new episode of Opinion City. I'm your host, Ralph. I'm here again with my co-host and tag team partner, as always, Sean. What is going on?
What's going on, man? A bit of a last-minute change-up this week, but that's okay. Things happen that are out of our control, and we will definitely have Miss Kimberly down the line at some point. But we decided instead to make the focal point Money in the Bank, because that is tomorrow in London, Money in the Bank. And we decided to do a list of our top 5 favorite Money in the Bank cash-ins as our main event topic.
Yeah, so a lot going on. It's been a really interesting week in wrestling. Of course, as Sean mentioned, for those of you that are here for the Kimberly interview, we will have that rescheduled, and we'll let you guys know when we're able to have her on the program again. As Sean said, out of our control, but we wish her all the best at this time, and we'll get that interview rescheduled and be sure to get her on the show soon. But it has been it's been a pretty big week in wrestling. Obviously, for those that don't know, today the late breaking news that Droz has passed away, Darren Drozdov of WWE fame.
54 years old, man.
Yeah.
Crazy. So,
it's never good when we lose anybody in the wrestling community. But this was a particularly tough one. I feel like a lot of people, really sort of followed his story. Just as how everything went down, people really kind of were drawn to his story. So I know, ups and downs over the years. So another member of the wrestling community gone. So our thoughts and prayers go out to the family and friends of Darren Drozdov. But also, just a lot of stuff going on this week. We kind of started the week off with Forbidden Door,
dude, that could be a whole episode in itself. I thought that whole show was phenomenal. I was going into it not expecting much, and I came out with just all smiles. I was in the end just happy and like with glee. Like it was, oh my god.
Yeah, I think putting the wrestling matches aside, because for one, I mean, just some incredible talent. Matches that we will probably never see matches of that quality again. Although I am interested to see when they finally pull the trigger on Ospreay Omega 3, because it's just screaming for it now. So I can't wait to see when they pull the trigger on that one. Danielson Okada was amazing.
So good. It's crazy he fractured his forearm and wrestled another 10 minutes after the injury.
And if you haven't seen the picture of the forearm,
it's worse.
Number one, I would say go online and look for it. And number two, I would say don't go online and look for it, because it is bad. It is. I saw that picture and I was like horrified. I'm like, that's unbelievable. But
it's way worse than
just I thought. Yeah, just overall a great show. And for me, I think again, putting all the great matches aside, I feel like the production quality of Forbidden Door, it just had such a special feel to it. Just the whole thing from top to bottom, the entrances, the setup, having the New Japan ring announcer there, just the whole presentation of it was pretty incredible. And you can't discount how amazing it is to have someone like Kevin Kelly making the call.
Yeah, it was just crazy.
Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, just a huge success. Easily my favorite pay-per-view of the year so far, because it was just enjoyable from a wrestling standpoint. It wasn't big like WrestleMania. It wasn't like this big spectacle, but it had a feel to it. Yes, you're right. It did feel important, because when you look at something like WrestleMania, you put importance on the event because it's WrestleMania. So it's important every year. It's usually the ending and the beginning of the whole year, the storylines, things like that. You've got the road to WrestleMania. This is the end, and so we put importance on that. Simply because of the event. Like there could be a subpar card, and we would still put importance on it because it is WrestleMania.
Yeah.
But this show was important because we put importance on the wrestlers. When we look at, especially like Danielson Okada, how many times could they say whoever wins this match can easily be considered the best wrestler in the world?
Yeah.
And they meant it.
And they said it every time, and they let you know that, hey, this is why this match is on last, because it's the two best performers of our time on both different sides of the spectrum going at it for the first time, I think, ever.
Yeah, and just like anything else, anybody else I'm sure that watched that would feel bad for those two to have to follow Ospreay and Omega, but Danielson Okada was the match that pretty much sold the card. I mean, you had that announced as the first match, and people looked at that and said, "That's it. I've got to see this show," and that's based on one match alone. And then you get Omega Ospreay named after that. Like, come on, it's just one thing after another, just building upon building upon building, and just putting together an incredible show from start to finish. So we had that this week.
I'm just curious how much Tony Khan showed out for the final countdown for Daniel Bryan.
Yeah. So the conversation that I heard from him on Busted Open this week was that he was not willing to put out a number. However, he did say it would probably equal one wrestler's entire contract. So that gives you an idea.
I'm not surprised at all. Worth it, but I'm not surprised.
Well, and from what I understand, they wanted to get that for Daniel Bryan when he first debuted in AEW, but there were issues with the band Europe at the time that did not want to license their music, and so it took quite some time for them to really put out there that they want to now start licensing some of their music. And so I think it was a no-brainer at that point. But as far as I understand, a one-time thing. But I'm okay with that because it was a special moment and it deserved something special like that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, for me, again, when I talk about that show, I talk about the production value and the feel of the show. And when Daniel Bryan came out and he is standing on the top rope and the crowd is just singing the final countdown, it was so awesome. And you could see the smile on Bryan's face. Like, here's a guy who's supposed to be, a heel, a member of the Blackpool Combat Club. Like, he's not supposed to be the guy that like everybody's cheering, but this event kind of existed in its own universe somewhere, because I mean, if you were not losing your mind over watching Daniel Bryan come out to Final Countdown and just watching the crowd be involved and the smile on his face, if you were not freaking out over that, I don't understand how you're a wrestling fan. Because
freaking out isn't even the word for it. I was like just giddy because I saw somewhere, I think it was on TikTok, someone posted a side-by-side of him coming out in 2009 in Ring of Honor to that song at the same point as the fans sang his song at Forbidden Door. And it was like almost the same amount of loudness then as it was now. It was just cool. Fans don't forget certain things. That was like years ago. Fans don't forget things, and that's just cool.
No, certainly not. And you have the AEW fan base is a completely different fan base than any other wrestling company. But again, you had mentioned fans don't forget these things. I don't think AEW fans forget these things, because the kind of people that are giant AEW fans are fans of wrestlers like, Bryan Danielson. They're fans of things like Ring of Honor. They're the kind of people that, were marking out during Collision when Samoa Joe and CM Punk got in the ring together for the first time. And,
because they
like
had
15 years.
Yeah, because they had their 3-match trilogy back in Ring of Honor, and it was just some of the best stuff that they'd done up to that point. It was just great matches, each one. It was just a perfect trilogy, and to have them sort of tease that. I want to see it.
I definitely think there's room down the line for that to happen. But yeah, it's just, AEW fans don't forget those kind of things because they're fans of that kind of stuff. So, I feel like the Forbidden Door was a lot of special moments for them like that. A great fan base up in Canada to be in front of. The crowd was hot all night. So just a great show. And things have just been ramping up towards Money in the Bank.
Yes.
The Bloodline storyline is just continuing to basically steamroll everything else in wrestling. It's there's no question whatsoever that it is the best thing going in wrestling. It is the most exciting thing going in wrestling. Before we started recording, but you had mentioned that you had seen online, and I had seen the same thing, that they're talking about Dominic Mysterio and Cody Rhodes being the main event for Money in the Bank. And honestly, I do not see, okay, so you've got Cody Rhodes and you've got Dom, which is one thing. Then you've got Seth Rollins defending his title, which is a whole nother thing. But I don't see how you pick any of those, even the Money in the Bank matches. I don't see how you pick any of those over, the Bloodline Civil War match. I don't know how that doesn't go on last no matter what.
That should be the last one, especially because the last 3 pay-per-views they've put the Bloodline on last because there was always a big twist at every end of the show. Yeah. It was like the big tie-in for the storyline. So having him not be on last this time around almost makes it seem like the story is not as important as Cody versus Dom, which doesn't make any sense at all.
No, I don't get it at all. I'm sorry. If the Bloodline is on a show, that's the main focal point. I don't care what else is going on. Doesn't matter who else is wrestling. That is the focal point. Until we resolve these issues, that's the focal point. So for me, I think that's got to go on last. I don't know how anything follows that. I'm sorry. I feel bad for anybody that has to. But yeah, I don't see how anybody follows that.
Before we get into the Money in the Bank matches, I did want to get your thoughts on the show. How did you feel about Moxley name dropping Chikara on AEW on Wednesday?
Oh, listen. So there's a lot of things I think about that. I think it's brilliant storytelling to a point. See, I think that at some point, I think that AEW is going to have to run back what that exactly meant. I think, and honestly, I think Eddie Kingston is the perfect person to do it. And I think Eddie's got to go out there and he's got to cut a promo where he says, listen, you said last week, who cares about that Chikara BS? Well, listen, most people don't know the story. Most people don't know why I hate Claudio so much. And I think he needs to tell them why he hates Claudio so much. I think he needs to run the story back because honestly, I don't think enough people know the real story. I don't think enough people know what went down in Chikara. Now, those of us who have been fans of Chikara for a long time obviously know what's going on. But I found it interesting. So I was listening to them talk about this on Busted Open this week, and one of the things that I noticed was that when they first started talking about the promo, because part of it was they keep talking about how everything that Eddie Kingston does is real, how he's like the realest wrestler out there, and that's why people connect to him. So they started the conversation off by talking about how things were real in the ring. So then they shifted the conversation to how things were real outside of the ring, and they went to that backstage promo. And as they're talking about that backstage promo, when they're talking about the realism and what made it feel so real to fans, they were talking about how Moxley's wife, Renee, was getting in the middle of things and, really kind of trying to take control of the situation. And at the very end, the last thing she says is, "You need to fix this," to Eddie. You know, and so they were having this conversation about that, and I'm thinking to myself, they're not bringing up the Chikara comment. Because if you're going to talk about the realism, you have to talk about that Chikara comment, because that's like real stuff. That's
where the real
history.
Story is. Yeah, that's where their history is, and it would be super smart to have them bring that back up on Dynamite or Saturday.
Well, sure. So they did eventually make a comment about the Chikara situation, the comment, and they really didn't get heavy into it. They just brought up the comment, and then they kind of moved on, and then they went back to talking about how real it was, because Renee was getting involved, and maybe why she was telling Eddie he needed to fix it instead of telling Mox, hey, you have to fix this, whatever. But I often wonder if, and again, it was interesting because the episode that I was listening to was Dave LaGreca, Tommy Dreamer, and Bully Ray. And, Tommy kind of, and I think a lot of people do, consider Tommy like a wrestling historian. I mean, the guy knows a lot about the history of wrestling, but I wonder how much these guys know about the actual story of, Eddie and Claudio in Chikara. And I wonder if maybe that had something to do with why they didn't bring it up more, because maybe they just weren't completely aware of what the story was.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but that's just, that's a guess of mine that's like in the back of my head.
No, yeah.
But,
no, I get that.
So...
when I, as soon as he said it, as soon as I saw it on the TV, I sent Ralph a message. All I said was, I was just so excited. I was like, bro, they just announced that they just name dropped Chikara on AEW Dynamite. I'm so excited. Like, freaked out.
Yeah, I wasn't home at the time, so I made
I was
sure
so
that
excited I couldn't contain myself. I was like, "Oh my god!"
As soon as I got home, I pulled it up on the DVR. Yeah, that is super cool, and you can't get more real than that. Like,
no.
It's name drop. I mean, anybody that knows anything about indies should know the name Chikara, because they were so huge on the indies for a long time. So people should know that name. So when you name drop something like that, people should be like, whoa, like now he's getting into like real stuff here. So, for me, it was a really big deal. I think it's really interesting that they brought that up. For a while, the name Chikara didn't really have a good reputation in the wrestling world, just because of some of the things that went on during the speaking out movement. And I won't get into any of those things, and I won't say either way whether they happened or whether they didn't happen. I was not there. I can't say for sure. But Chikara didn't exactly have the best name for a while there. So I think it's great that they're bringing that up again. I hope that there's more connections they make to that, because I think if you're really going to have part of the issue, because the issue at hand here is that Mox and Eddie were friends, really close friends, and now Mox is on a team with Claudio, who Eddie and Claudio are like mortal enemies.
Yep.
So that's the whole issue here. So they have to delve into that somewhere, because they got to get to the root of why Eddie and Claudio hate each other so much.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to tell the story, and you've got to tell the story of them and Chikara if you're going to do it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they take that. I mean, I know there's a lot of moving pieces in that story, but it'll be interesting to see where they take it, because I don't think that Mox would have just brought that up for nothing. I don't think he would have just name dropped Chikara like that so blatantly in a promo that was meant to be very, very real. Without there being some sort of plan to pay off on that eventually. So it'll be interesting to see. AEW has a number of connections to Chikara, so it'll be, with certain people that are there. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But for me, yeah, it was as soon as you sent that to me, I was like, oh, I got to see this immediately, because, like, I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but toot. I feel like I'm like the biggest Chikara fan I know. Like me, I've got a couple other friends that are like Chikara diehards, and it's just, I know that the fan base for Chikara was rabid and hardcore and dedicated and loyal. So there are a lot of people out there that I'm sure were, popping just as much as you and I were.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get into tomorrow's women's Money in the Bank match. We have Zelina Vega versus the man, Becky Lynch, versus Trish Stratus' protege, Zoe Stark, versus Bayley, versus her tag team partner, Io Sky, versus the legendary Trish Stratus. What are your thoughts, and who are you picking for the win?
All right, so first off, my thoughts are, I don't understand why we have 7 in the men's Money in the Bank match, but only 6 in the women's match. I'm not really sure what that's all about.
Didn't even notice that.
But for any instance, I'm really kind of conflicted about this one, because there's a couple things about this. There's, again, I think a lot of moving pieces in this one. You've got Zoe Stark and Trish Stratus, which, they've got their connection now, but at the same time, I feel like, I don't know. I don't think we're going to see dissension between the two of them, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see one, take out the other if it comes down to it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't really understand. Like at this point, it's such a new thing, and it seems very much, they're putting a lot of importance on that relationship as it relates to Becky Lynch. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. Then you have Bayley and Io Sky, which, again, I don't really know what's going to happen there either. I mean, they've been teasing, sort of the breakdown of that for a while. I think that, I don't know. That's a whole nother situation. And then honestly, I feel like Zelina Vega's the wild card in all of this, because she really doesn't fit into any of this anywhere, other than the fact that, she had her shot in Puerto Rico, and obviously, in the end got totally manhandled by Rhea Ripley.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she's kind of the wild card in all of this. For me, I really feel like I would love to see Bayley win this. That's who I would like to see win because honestly, I'm a huge Bayley fan. I've been a huge Bayley fan for a long time. As I watched NXT, I watched with a group of friends. We religiously watched on the network every week, and I was the guy that was always saying Bayley needs to drop the gimmick and turn heel. Like, it just needs to happen to refresh the character. And I about shot out of the couch and fell over when they finally pulled the trigger. I was so excited. But I am like a huge Bayley fan, so I would love to see Bayley win. However, I think through all of this, I think we're probably going to get a Becky Lynch win here. I don't know. I don't really see much else happening. I see, if it's not Becky Lynch, then I feel like it's got to be Trish Stratus, because I think if it comes down to it, Bayley and Io Sky are going to cancel out. I feel like Zelina Vega will be the wild card that will somehow get canceled out. I think Zoe Stark and Trish Stratus will probably take Becky Lynch out. I don't see Zoe Stark turning on Trish Stratus. If anything, I see her helping Trish Stratus. But it's, to me, I think it's got to be Becky Lynch, unless, because I don't see the value in having Trish win it, simply because, I don't think this is like a long-term run for Trish, and I don't really see her cashing in and winning a title at this point, just because I don't think it's going to be a long run for her. So I'm all about Lynch at this point. I guess that's my pick. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's my pick.
Thinking about it, I was gonna say Trish, but just because I feel like if she does want to stay around longer and do like a long run, have her get like one last title run in, and then she can really call it like quits and retire for once and for all. Because I feel like that would be kind of cool. Is you have Trish win Money in the Bank probably for the first time, because they haven't had it for that long yet for the women's side. It would be a huge thing for that match to have a legend win it, first of all. Then you have the fact that she can go on to, face whoever champion she wants and let her have one last run with the belt for, a few months. It doesn't have to be long. It could be like 2-3 months at the most, maybe 4, however long she feels that she wants to stay, and then have her, pass the torch to the next female wrestler.
I think that would be interesting to see. And I definitely think it's possible that they kind of go that route as far as, just letting Trish have that one last run. Again, I think it all depends on how long Trish is going to stay around. I don't think people expected her to stay around as long as she has so far. So, anything could happen at this point. I think this is probably going to be a much better match than people think it's going to be, as long as they give them enough time. I think as long as they let, I'd be really disappointed if this match somehow lost out on time for other things. Hopefully this match goes on first. That would be my ultimate solution for this, because then they wouldn't have to suffer further down the card if something ran long.
Yeah,
like if you have the bloodline out there, because obviously we don't think, from what we've read, that the bloodline is going to be the main event. So if they have the bloodline match out there, maybe middle of the show or whatever, if that runs a little long, then something's gotta get cut. And that if the women's match is anywhere near the second half or the end of the show, that's gonna suffer. That's where they're gonna pull the time from. So yeah. Hopefully, for me, I would think the best situation would be just to have that match go on first. But it's also an exciting way to kind of set the table for the rest of the card. Having a Money in the Bank match first, and they're not going to have the men's first. No, I highly doubt that. So
if you're going to have it be about Money in the Bank, then as many matches as you have, you need to make the focal point the Money in the Bank matches. That should just, same as if you had Hell in a Cell. The show should be focused on the Hell in a Cell matches. Like, it has to follow the theme of the show. Those matches should be when they get the time versus the rest of the the card down below.
Yeah. I would say that honestly, and this is before we even get into the men's match, I'm not a fan of the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. I'm not a fan of the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view either.
No,
I don't think.
No.
First off, Hell in a Cell needs to be a special match. It needs to be the finality of a feud. It needs to be important. I don't think there needs to be continuous pay-per-views where it has to be a thing. I don't like that at all.
I want them to bring it back to Mania. Have it be a Mania match again.
Yeah, Money in the Bank. Yeah, Money in the Bank started out as a Mania thing. Money in the Bank should have always stayed a Mania thing. To me that made it special because, I mean, having a pay-per-view is still having it once a year, but that match was always one of the highlights of WrestleMania. And especially if you're doing a 2-night WrestleMania and you're trying to fill that card, on both nights. I mean, having that Money in the Bank match as a reserve, let Money in the Bank open like night 2 every night at WrestleMania. Like bring it back. Like have the women's Money in the Bank open up the first night, have the men's Money in the Bank open up the second night. Because, how exciting was it before when, like, you would have somebody early on in the show win Money in the Bank, and then the rest of WrestleMania you're thinking to yourself, are they going to cash in tonight? Are they going to take the opportunity?
You just didn't know.
That's exciting to me. Like, I want to see that again. But,
it was exciting.
So that's my thoughts on the women's match. I like where you're going with the Trish Stratus thing. It's definitely a possibility. Of course, now that I've picked Becky Lynch and you've picked Trish Stratus, it's probably a lock that neither one of them are going to win.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
we both say our guesses and they're both entirely wrong. Yeah. So the men's side has me a little worried, and if you've read any of the articles online, you'll know why I'm worried. But the card goes as follows: Ricochet versus Nakamura versus L.A. Knight. Yeah. Santos Escobar versus, let's be honest, Pete Dunne. I'm not calling him Butch. Damian Priest and Logan Paul. Now,
Correct.
My concern is, from what I've read on the interwebs, Triple H and Vince are kind of at odds with their choices for winners. Triple H is on the Damian Priest and or LA Knight side, while Vince supposedly wants Logan Paul to win Money in the Bank. I am not one of those people that agree with that thought, because I feel like at this point you have all these new stars on the rise. You need to let the ones who are there full time give them the spotlight. Like I see either Priest or LA Knight getting it. I kind of want it to be LA Knight a little more because I'm so high on him right now. He's so good, and I love just his whole character is just perfect. So I really hope that he gets it. That's my pick. But yeah, I'm just concerned because I don't think Logan needs it. I just don't.
All right. So for me, as far as the Money in the Bank men's match is concerned, so we look at when we're trying to figure out who's going to be, who we think is going to win a match. One of the things that we think about, especially when it comes to title matches, world title matches, that kind of thing, we try to think about who's going to be a credible challenger for the title. But the great thing to me about Money in the Bank is that whoever wins it doesn't have to be a credible challenger. So in that respect, I wouldn't necessarily be distraught if Logan Paul won it, simply because, yes, Logan Paul is he's a celebrity in the world of wrestling, but I think he's one of the more talented celebrities that they have. I mean, there was probably a legitimate second where some people actually believed that Logan Paul was going to beat Roman Reigns. So I don't know. For me, if I look at the names that are in this match, you have Damian Priest, which Damian Priest is a real credible talent, and Damian Priest I don't feel like is getting the look or the opportunities that he deserves. He's kind of like second fiddle to Finn Balor, and I think it's a real shame because he's super talented. I kind of feel the same way with Santos Escobar. I feel like and again, nothing against the LWO, nothing against what they're doing with that, but I feel like he's getting lost in the shuffle there because I think he's much more talented than what he's getting out of that. So if I look at and again, you could say the same thing about Ricochet. Although, Ricochet's never reached the heights that he probably should have. But again, he's a smaller guy. He's a high flyer. So maybe that's, not what they want to focus on. Same thing with Shinsuke Nakamura. If you look at this entire match is built with people that are not getting the looks that they deserve because they're much more talented than what they're getting from creative. Yeah. So for me, this one's a real crapshoot trying to figure out who could win this one, because I feel like LA Knight has the momentum going. He's got the crowd behind him, obviously. But there's just so many different ways that they could go with this. I think when it comes down to it, I think that simply for, I think you won't see the signs, but I think it's going to be one of those situations where, if LA Knight doesn't win, we riot.
Yeah.
So I would think that they would have to pull the trigger on LA Knight, but here's what I'm seeing with this, because I'm looking at these names and I'm not seeing anybody that I could see legitimately try and cash in on Roman Reigns. The only person I could even see trying that is Logan Paul, just because he has that history from the match with Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
Anybody cashing in on Seth Rollins, I don't really see either, just because I'm not looking at these guys as I don't see them legitimately putting a title right now on any of these guys. So my thought would be that we're probably, I think for the fans' sake, we might get an LA Knight win here. However, I think this is going to be one of those situations where eventually we're going to see this Money in the Bank go after another title. I don't think they're going after one of the world titles. Because I just don't see it.
I think that it's cool that they added that rule, by the way. I think that makes it more unique that whoever wins it can go after any belt that they want, rather than just having to be one or the other. They have options.
Yeah.
More options.
Well, and I think at this point, if we're not going to put Money in the Bank back on WrestleMania, which there's pretty much no way that's going to happen at this point. So if we're not going to put it back on WrestleMania, then we might as well go all in on the idea of a Money in the Bank pay-per-view. You should have 2 men's and 2 women's matches. We need a secondary women's title somewhere, but that's a whole nother story. But you definitely, you could have a world title, men's Money in the Bank. You could have a men's Money in the Bank where the winner can challenge for either the U.S. or the Intercontinental title. Yeah. At the very least, I think there should be a tag team Money in the Bank match with a shot at the tag titles. You could do that for the women too, to be honest. I think it should be. I think it should be very akin to the old Survivor Series pay-per-views, where the entire pay-per-view was Survivor Series matches. Yeah. This entire pay-per-view should be Money in the Bank matches, as far as I'm concerned.
Ladder matches galore.
Yeah, why not? We've seen other pay-per-views where, things like that have happened. We've had the TNA pay-per-views where they've been all cage matches. So why can't we do a WWE pay-per-view that's all Money in the Bank matches?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we're going to end up with an LA Knight win, just because it's good for the fans right now.
I feel like it's that, and I think he's already in his 40s, so not that wrestling age matters anymore. We've already had that discussion, but he doesn't have as much time as some of the younger guys would have to go for that brass ring, So I feel like it's either now or never.
Well, yeah, we're at that point. I feel like if they don't do something with him soon, he's going to be one of those guys that asks for his release.
Yeah.
because they're just.
Fortunately,
I mean, here's another example of a guy, and I think this really kind of harkens back to. I mean, Matt Cardona, Zack Ryder is my best example. I mean, here's a guy who's building things for himself because creative simply isn't doing it.
yeah.
So that's just me. I think though, I think they got to pull the trigger on him at this point. Even if he cashes in and doesn't win, even if he cashes in on a mid card title, whatever the case may be, I think you got to pull the trigger on him.
Yeah, I think it's his time to shine. Give him the rocket and just send him out there, man.
Yep, rocket strapper. They used to. That's what they used to call. Didn't they call the listeners of Edge and Christian's Pod of Awesomeness? They called their fans rocket strappers.
I think so.
I believe that's the name they came up with.
Because
because they were always talking about rocket strappers and strapping a rocket to somebody and shooting them to the moon. So
yep.
I think that's what they came up with. But yeah. So anything else on the Money in the Bank pay-per-view really kind of stand out to you? I mean, is it really just is everything else just a pretty much foregone conclusion?
I mean,
it's pretty much other than those matches, it's a throwaway.
You know, our focal point here is the Money in the Bank. So I'm just going to go off and say no. I just want to see who they see basically as potential champions, because that's really what these two matches highlight is whoever wins these matches has a chance to win any belt they want at any point in time. And whoever wins is sort of what they see as their next top guy going forward.
Yeah.
The only person was Otis when he won the Money in the Bank and he lost it.
Yeah. For me, there's just nothing else exciting on the card. Like, there's no other matches that I'm really that excited to see, to be honest.
I'm sure they're all going to be great matches, don't get me wrong, but I'm here for the Money in the Bank match.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Speaking of Money in the Bank, why don't we get into our top 5 cash-ins?
Let's do it.
Do you want to start with your number 5?
Sure. All right. So, in thinking about cash-ins for me, the first thing I thought about when it comes to Money in the Bank cash-ins is just overall excitement, because it's always super exciting, because for the most part, Money in the Bank is a surprise. Like, we have no idea that somebody's cashing in until they cash in, for the most part. So for me, it's all about excitement. So my number 5 cash in is The Miz cashing in on Randy Orton on an episode of Monday Night Raw back in November of 2010.
Right.
Randy Orton had just won a match against Wade Barrett. There was interference from the Nexus at the time, who was feuding with John Cena at the time. So John Cena was involved, the Nexus was involved, and Randy Orton was pretty banged up as far as it goes. And he was in the ring celebrating, and his music was playing, and the referee raises his hand, and he's kind of like hanging out in the corner, holding himself up with the... And his music stops, and all of a sudden, The Miz's music hits. And here comes The Miz, trucking down to the ring. Poor Alex Riley trying to keep up with him. Which, again, if you're looking at the overall excitement of this, at least for me, part of it is Alex Riley, which I'll get to in a minute. But they have it's not as quick as some of the cash-ins. The Miz and Randy Orton go back and forth for a little while. They're in the ring, they're out of the ring. At one point, Miz has Randy Orton kind of wrapped up around the corner post, and but it turns out that at the end, Randy Orton goes for his RKO, and as he goes to hit the RKO, Miz blocks it a little bit, wraps up the arms, hits him with the skull-crushing finale, and we get the 1, 2, 3. And then in the background of the whole thing, you would think that somebody had shot Alex Riley in the foot. because he jumped like 85 feet in the air. I have never seen anybody so excited to be the secondary person to someone who's just won a match in my entire life. Alex Riley went absolutely nowhere after this, but The Miz, talk about strapping a rocket to somebody and shooting him to the moon. This would take him on to his title defense against Cena at WrestleMania, which is not only one of my favorite Miz matches, but honestly, the promo that they do before the match, where the Miz is standing there in front of the TV screens and they're playing Nas and they're showing all the footage from like when Miz first showed up. Like, this was the start of all of that. This was where the Miz finally won the title, finally got that validation that he was looking for, that validation that proved, like, listen, I'm here, I've made it, you can't deny it now. I just feel like that was the start of it. And for me, even looking at my entire list, I think that's still the most exciting one for me on my entire list, and that's number 5. So,
wow.
I think that was a huge start for the Miz, a huge moment for him, and definitely a very exciting moment as far as Monday Night Raw goes. So that is my number 5.
That was a very good pick, my friend.
Yeah, I like the Miz.
The Miz, yes.
Yeah, I think that's,
as he says, awesome.
Yeah, that's the start for me. That's the start of everything right there as far as the Miz goes. All right, so what do you got for your number 5?
You'll like my number 5 because you literally just mentioned her before. Mine goes to Bayley from Money in the Bank 2019. This was right after Becky Two Belts emerged after WrestleMania 35 and had both Raw and SmackDown championships. And going into Money in the Bank, she had to defend both belts. She retained her Raw Women's belt, but unfortunately, Charlotte Flair ended up beating her for the SmackDown Women's Championship. And after showing her celebrating for a while, guess whose music hit? And surprise, surprise, Bayley went in to cash in her Money in the Bank and became not only the longest reigning SmackDown champion at 380 days, but the first 3 women's Grand Slam winner in history up to that point. So it was not just a moment, but it actually pretty much skyrocketed Bayley to like superstardom from that point on.
Yeah, if I'm looking at my list, that Bayley win would be like 5.5 for me, because honestly, and I almost put that on the list, because that is a huge moment. That sort of puts Bayley into an elite category when you talk about the Grand Slam win. And I just, just an exciting moment in Bayley's career. We've seen some cash-ins that have been unsuccessful, and just knowing that she was able to go out there and Charlotte Flair of all people, it's a really good moment for her career. I'm not exactly sure that she's ever really gotten back to that point again.
I think she's slowly getting to that point.
I'm hoping.
It's a slow build.
I'm hoping that they go somewhere with that. But it is sometimes when we look at these Money in the Bank cash-ins, it's not just about the surprise of it. It's not just about the excitement, but a lot of these cash-ins become like defining moments, and in some cases almost pinnacles of people's careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
and for Bayley, it was her first reign as champion on the main roster, and she held it for over a year, and she's won the belt since then, but she hasn't held it nearly as long as she has the first time around.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at like the history of women's wrestling in WWE, and you start to look at things like the women's revolution and things like that, one of the things that they always point back to as far as the women's revolution is this idea of the 4 horsewomen in NXT.
Yep.
And if you look at the 4 horsewomen and their rise from NXT to the main roster and each gaining individual success there, Bayley was really the last one to see the amount of success that the others had seen. Like, she was really the last one to step into that sort of successful limelight. And I feel like that win, that cash in, really kind of catapulted her back to being at the same level as the others. Because if you look at the four of them, Becky, Sasha, Charlotte, and Bayley, when they all came to the main roster, they all did, really incredible things. We see where Becky Lynch has gone. At one point, Sasha was pretty much the most popular female in the company, and she's had great success. Charlotte, there's not much you can say about, when she talks about being the queen, she's not kidding. Like, yeah, there's a level of success there that I don't think many, wrestlers will ever see. But then you have Bayley, who, in the fans' eyes, she was very successful because she was this role model for young girls. The idea of her like being this huge fan, showing the pictures and the videos of her meeting wrestlers when she was younger, and just very relatable to the fans. But she never saw that sort of commercial success that some of the others saw.
Yeah,
she was the last one to really get in there. So I think that was a big moment in her career, and kind of cementing her as being back on the level as the other three.
Yeah, no, it absolutely made her level with the other three, because, again, that wasn't just her big moment. Not only did she beat Charlotte, but again, she held that belt for over a year, and it was, again, her very first time holding the belt. Like, yeah, Becky can say that she was the first SmackDown Women's Champion, but Becky can say that she was the longest SmackDown Women's Champion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you look at things like that, you look at how the company views her. So not only was she able to successfully cash in the Money in the Bank, they gave her a win over Charlotte, and then that led to that title run that you're talking about. So obviously, this was a moment in time when the company really felt strongly about her, as a wrestler, as a character, as a TV personality, somebody that could really be sort of that face with the belt.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool. All right, moving on to my number 4.
Yes.
And I picked this one because I felt like, for me, this cash-in was a little different than a lot of other cash-ins. This wasn't just your normal cash-in, and this was Randy Orton cashing in on Daniel Bryan at SummerSlam in 2013. And the reason that this is so different is that it wasn't just Randy Orton cashing in. You had Triple H sort of swerving everybody on this one, and really kind of helping Randy Orton to that win and taking back that title. And I think that was a real sort of paradigm shift there. I think it definitely did some things for how people viewed Triple H. So I think there were a lot of afterwards, sort of ramifications that came from that. I think for me, that Money in the Bank cash in was more than just about the cash in. So I think there was a definitely a lot to it. I think that just seeing the way Triple H was involved in all of that, and even sort of seeing where things kind of led to after that. So if you look at this is SummerSlam, so we're at about the middle of the year. So Daniel Bryan loses that title, but what do we see happen after he loses that title? You look at the slow build to the Yes Movement. You look at the following year's WrestleMania, which was WrestleMania 30, and look at the absolute incredible, sort of career-changing stuff that Daniel Bryan went through leading up to WrestleMania 30, and then getting the big win against Triple H, getting the win for the title in the main event. Like there's just so much, I think, that comes out of this cash in that doesn't just have to do with that cash in. Plus, it's another title win for Randy Orton, who at that point probably didn't need another title win. I mean, Randy Orton, I think, is one of those guys that you talk about that is a champion with or without the title. Like, here's a guy who doesn't need a championship to be main event. This is a guy that anytime he kind of steps on the scene, he almost instantly inserts himself into, main event roles. I mean, he had the tag run with Riddle, and that was great. I mean, I think we got to see a whole nother side of Randy Orton, but at any time, you literally could have seen Randy Orton turning to Riddle, giving him an RKO, saying, "I'm done with this. I should be world champion," and just instantly being back in the main event. Yeah. Because that's just who Randy is as a wrestler, as a person, as a quote unquote legend in this business, So I think for me, that Money in the Bank carried so much weight to it that elevated a lot of things outside of that cash in.
Yeah, and great minds think alike. That was my number 4 pick as well. So
that's amazing.
That was my pick.
That's really cool.
I believe that was one of the best storyline based cash-ins ever in WWE history. Because it wasn't just, like I said, about the cash-in. It was about the story that was leading up to the cash-in, leading up to WrestleMania 30 with Daniel Bryan. Because that was just at the peak of the Yes Movement. It had just started to bloom right around SummerSlam 2013. And we knew that because John Cena heard the fans. He was one who handpicked Bryan as his opponent for SummerSlam leading up to that match. He said, "I pick you." And what did he do? He beat John Cena, which yes, we can, say about Orton's cash-in, but the fact that Bryan beat John Cena clean in the main event, SummerSlam, is already a huge feat.
Oh, absolutely.
Before the inevitable betrayal by Triple H that led to the Yes Movement taking over Mania or WWE for almost a year, where they had to listen to them. They had to say, "Okay, we need to make Bryan our guy because the fans will riot."
Yeah.
That was something. Happened.
Yeah, well, and that was something else I forgot to mention in all of this is that before Randy Orton cashed in on Daniel Bryan had just beaten John Cena, and as we all know, I love a good John Cena loss.
Yeah,
as much as I may respect the guy for some of the things he's done, I am 100% a loyal non-C Nation member. I am the chief executive officer of the anti-C Nation. So I am not a fan of John Cena as a character. Again, a lot of it not his fault. You get what you get from creative sometimes, and when you're stuck as the forebearer of the PG era, there's not much you can do. However, a good John Cena loss for me is always a good time. And so, yeah, it's you bring up a great point there. That storyline, like we talked about the storyline after the cash-in, but that storyline leading up to cash-in was so good because, I mean, we all know what we know about Daniel Bryan / Bryan Danielson. We know what he was like on the Indies. We know how good he is. We know what his early time in NXT, what a failure that was, just because I don't think they ever really got him or they ever really knew what to do with him.
That just doesn't exist in my mind.
When you have Michael Cole on commentary burying people because they spent 10 years on the Indies or what have you, you know that there's something wrong. Because that would never fly these days. I mean, the Black and Gold brand was built on guys who spent 10 years on the Indies, but that storyline leading up to it was so good.
Yeah, like there's that whole like 2-year stint was just like the best like long-term booking from like Mania to Mania. Like it was just
Mm-hmm.
like they knew exactly what the plan was and they executed it in my eyes so well. Especially my favorite night leading up to Mania was when the Yes Movement took over Raw. They had fans in the ring and out of the ring just yesing Triple H to the point where he had to say yes to the match. And it was just a moment in time that I'll never forget because it was so cool.
That me, that was an amazing yes moment. The only moment I feel that eclipsed that just a little bit was when Daniel Bryan was in the Wyatt family.
Oh, that
and
cage
they
match?
had the cage match, and he was in the blue jumpsuit.
So good.
And when he finally turned on the Wyatt family, and he's like standing up on the cage and doing the yes, and you can see the entire crowd behind him just doing the yes as well. Like for me, that was such an emotionally charged moment just because people had been waiting for the other shoe to drop for so long, and when it finally did, the place went nuts. But the moment on Raw where the Yes Movement took over is just a hair behind that, because that is such a good moment as well.
Yeah, it's just moments that will live forever rent-free in my mind. That's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many great moments. Daniel Bryan is what he is, and the fact that he's having such a career resurgence and getting these amazing matches in AEW. I mean, one of the things they mentioned on Busted Open this week was that his match with Okada at Forbidden Door was probably one of the reasons why he went to AEW, because it would have made it possible at some point to have that match.
Yeah.
And so everything with him is all about just this quality wrestling right now, which is what he's always been about. But if you look at his WWE run, I feel like there's so many things that are just underrated there. The Yes Movement is not talked about enough. That became a worldwide phenomenon. You saw that at sporting events. You saw pro athletes doing that.
It wasn't just wrestling. Yeah. That thing went everywhere.
Oh, yeah. It was worldwide viral. So I don't think the Yes Movement sometimes gets enough credit, but I also don't think Team Hell No gets enough credit.
Because
Kane and Daniel Bryan were amazing.
No. I loved that whole... I loved everything about it. I loved that they were a comedy duo. I loved that it was, I'm the tag team champions. I loved just everything about it. They were such a good duo together. And like, I know that Kane should never be silly, but Kane silly like that made me so happy. Like it was a different side of Kane that you don't normally get to see, because you always see him as the monster. But it was just, I loved that time frame.
It's almost like anything they put in front of Kane, he just knocks it out of the park.
Just knows what to do. He gets it. That's why he's my favorite wrestler. To this day,
when they decide to make him a comedy character, he just knocks it out of the park. But I will say that as much as I liked Kane and Daniel Bryan together as part of Team Hell No, I think Dr. Shelby inches them out just a little bit as my favorite honorary member of Team Hell No.
Yeah, dude.
The stuff with Dr. Shelby was just, I mean, that's some of the funniest stuff we've ever seen on Raw. And there's been a lot of good stuff. I mean, I'm a Mean Street Posse fan, so that tells you everything you need to know. But like that Team Hell No stuff with Dr. Shelby was just amazing. But we're getting off track here.
No, it's cool.
We're going down the rabbit hole.
We're going down the rabbit hole. What happens? Listen, guys.
It's like when I watch YouTube
wrestling's
videos.
Kind of our thing, so we can just go down rabbit holes like this, and we just don't. It happens. I'm just gonna get into my number 3. Let's just do that.
Okay.
My number 3, we're going to Money in the Bank 2016, and this was an interesting time because you had Reigns as your champion. You had Rollins that had just come back from injury, from a really bad knee injury.
Mm-hmm.
And he was Rollins against Reigns for the championship at this specific Money in the Bank. Ambrose had already won his contract earlier in the night. Rollins beats Reigns. Ambrose's music hits. Ambrose cashes in on Rollins, beats Rollins. Ambrose becomes champion. So in one night, probably for the only time, all 3 members of the Shield were a champion in one night. Because Ambrose cashes in on Rollins after Rollins beats Reigns for the belt.
Yeah, And what I think is interesting about that is maybe not so much, and that's an amazing point when you think about the fact that all three members of when you look at the situation as it is, and we kind of look back in hindsight, knowing the things that we know now, it's amazing to see that on the bottom of that list is Roman Reigns, the guy that we're considering like one of the greatest wrestlers of all time now, having surpassed Pedro Morales on the list of longest reigning champions. I mean, we're talking about this guy as being in, one of the greatest storylines of the last 20, 30 years, possibly one of the greatest storylines of ever, possibly the greatest storyline of ever. We don't know how this is going to turn out in the end, but this could end up being the greatest story ever told in professional wrestling. Yeah. Over this period of time. But that night, Reigns was like the last guy, like he was the last guy on the list. Yeah. He got beat by Seth, then Ambrose beat Seth. Like, Roman was the first loser of the night.
Yeah. And for Ambrose, that came full circle because he had been waiting 3 years since the Shield betrayal to get his vengeance on Rollins. So what does he do? Mm-hmm. Cashes in on him as soon as he wins it. And there's his vengeance right there. There's his revenge. Sweet, sweet revenge.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And here's something I don't think people really necessarily think about, but I think it's really interesting to bring this up because if you look at what happened there. So you have Dean Ambrose win the title, and I don't think that if Dean Ambrose won the title that night, we wouldn't have the Jon Moxley we have today. Because the reason that we have the Jon Moxley that we have today, the reason that he didn't stay with WWE, the reason he went to AEW, all of this was because, in large part, he was not happy with the way his creative was being handled in WWE. And I feel like a lot of that stems back to that title run. Because what's the one thing we always talk about on this show? Missed opportunities. And I feel like that title run with him was just missed. I don't think when they split up the Shield, I don't think Dean Ambrose, as we know him now as Jon Moxley, ever really fit into that WWE mold. He was like he was like Moxley light. And it did not go well. Oh yeah.
Vince just saw him as this funny guy. Vince didn't see him as this unstable, crazy guy. Vince just thought he was just a funny guy that just made jokes and was just funny, but also kind of weird too.
Yeah, it just didn't fit. He never really was able to realize, I think, the potential that he wanted to realize in WWE because who he was not who he was allowed to be. So he was never going to reach that potential.
No. He needed to go elsewhere to find his inner Mox, and thank God in AEW he found it. He's never been happier. Now that he's in AEW, he's like the happiest wrestler ever.
Oh, absolutely. But again, I don't think we would have gotten there if we wouldn't have had that cash in and that title win. I think that really was the catalyst in sort of kicking off all these feelings of just not enjoying his time there, not feeling like the creative that was given to him was on the level that he wanted to be on. And, like you said, I mean, it's great that AEW did come around, that there was now a place for him to go, and a place for him to really sort of, like you said, find that inner Mox.
He even said in interviews that if the AEW was never formed, he probably would have went back to the Indies.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
But you have to look at the situation, because I mean, you do have guys. For example, I heard an interview with Matt Cardona this week. He was on Busted Open because he's got a big match with Bully Ray this weekend at the ECW Arena, and he had mentioned that 2022 was his most successful year ever. He made more money in 2022 than he had when he was in WWE.
Not
so there are guys that can go to the Indies and really make a career and a living for themselves that is a great living. Yeah, they're busting their butts. They're really, they're out there working day in and day out, and they're promoting their own brand, but it works for them. And but it's good though that there's a larger presence out there for someone like a Jon Moxley to go to, where he can be Jon Moxley.
Absolutely.
So yeah, right. that was a great pick. All right.
With your number 3.
Yeah. So my number 3 is sort of relates to your number 3. My number 3 is Seth Rollins cashing in at WrestleMania 31 to steal the title from Lesnar and Roman Reigns. Now, as much as I love the Bloodline storyline, I've been tired of Roman Reigns for a long time. And that's just me.
Yeah,
I don't say this because I think ring product is bad. I don't think the things that he does are necessarily bad. I'm simply tired of the character. And I've been saying that for a long time. I have been waiting for the Bloodline to implode for such a long time, simply because the story that I really want to see told is the story of what happens to Roman Reigns after he no longer has anybody. Like, it's just, he's on the island of relevancy by himself. How does he come back from that? And I think that's the character change that would make him relevant and fresh to me again, where I would now be invested in him again. Because I'm just, as far as the Bloodline goes, he's like the guy I'm least invested in this story. Well, anyways, so a Reigns loss to me, or a non-loss as it would be, is always good. But I feel like this was, this was probably the biggest cash in to happen at a Mania, and it was such a shock when Rollins came out. And in the history of professional wrestling, and this includes the Ultimate Warrior, I don't think I've ever seen anybody run faster to the ring than Seth Rollins did that night.
Oh my God, he booked it.
Like, Seth Rollins must have got like a 6-mile head start, and just like, he must have taken like 52 5-hour energies and just started like 6 miles down the road and had been running at the highest speed possible. I mean, he was like a blur coming down that ramp. I'm surprised he didn't somehow injure himself getting into the ring, because it was just the whole thing. The whole, we always talk about like the very first cash in was Edge, and they call him the ultimate opportunist. Well, that term greatly applies to Seth Rollins that night, because he went in there and just took the opportunity, took the title, and I feel like this was a really good way to end Mania, a very surprising way to end Mania. People always like to go home from Mania with a good feeling, and seeing that was incredible. I feel like that started a good title run for Seth. Definitely built some storylines there, and it was just, honestly, I talked about my number 5 being The Miz, and that being so super exciting. Like, that was the most exciting cash in to me. But this is just a hair below that, because honestly, who didn't jump out of their seat when Seth Rollins came running out there?
Yeah,
like,
it was just
so good.
Such a great moment.
Yeah, and I think if I have to look at to come up with my top 5, I did like a good little deep dive on all of the cash-ins. And if I look at all of the cash-ins, honestly, I think to me this one is the most surprising. And we've had some cash-ins that have been called ahead of time, like we knew people were cashing in. But for a lot of it, it was this element of surprise. Like, when is somebody going to cash in? Like, it's you've had people come down and like pretend they were going to cash in and then decide not to cash in. Like, there's always this element of surprise to it that makes it like so exciting. That's what kind of makes Money in the Bank such an interesting concept, is that's level of surprise and excitement. I think this was the most surprising of any cash-in. Obviously the first cash-in was the first cash-in, and so I don't think anybody saw that coming, and yet somehow I still think this was a bigger surprise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to me, that's a huge moment. I love that. I love that show. I love that Mania, and I love that Mania, specifically for that cash in as well. I think it was definitely, a big part of everything. And interestingly enough, and this has nothing to do with the cash in itself, but I do want to mention this. So WrestleMania 31 was a very interesting WrestleMania for me. I had always spent the majority of my life, having WrestleMania parties every year, because WrestleMania was like, not to be anti-religious or anything here, but WrestleMania was like my Christmas. WrestleMania was always my number one holiday of the year. I mean, I'm a very religious guy. Love Jesus, love God, work for the kingdom, all that stuff. However, WrestleMania was my day. Like, that was my thing. I always, if I was working, I always took the Monday off after WrestleMania, because nice. It's just my thing. So, I'd always had, big WrestleMania parties every year. And that year, everybody was out of town. Anybody that I used to watch with was out of town. And my dad, who was never really into wrestling, he had gone to a show or two with me. And, I've talked before about him and Chikara, and really being obsessed with Oleg the Usurper after the first time he saw him. But my dad was not a big wrestling fan. So he was like, well, I'll watch it with you. So I spent WrestleMania 31 watching the event with my father, and it was a really incredible evening because my father was fully paying attention to the whole show. He wasn't like sitting there reading a newspaper while he was watching the TV, which is normally what he would do. Intently watched the whole show with me. I literally explained every single match to him, told him the build up to the match. Like, I gave him all the storylines, and we watched that pay-per-view together. And, since he's been gone, I have not watched that pay-per-view in its entirety, which is odd for me because I rewatch WrestleManias a lot. But I've never fully watched that show again. I've only seen bits and pieces of it. I watch the Seth Rollins cash in from time to time when I'm watching, moments and things. But that pay-per-view will always hold a really special place to me because it's the only pay-per-view I've ever sat and watched with my father, who is no longer with us. So yeah, that's a very special moment to me.
That's really cool.
Yeah. All right. Let's get back to some happy discussions here. Let's talk about some more cash-ins, and I believe we are up to your number 2. We've got 2 apiece left, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm gonna do number 2. Is because not too often do Money in the Banks. They're not just always cheap wins, right? They're just some of them have been announced, or they challenge the person to a match at so and so time.
Yeah.
So the second ever cash in, Mr. Monday Night, Rob Van Dam, I think is extra special for multiple reasons. One, he challenged him to a match at One Night Stand, 2006, the very first one since the ECW reboot. 2, it was in the Hammerstein Ballroom, where the champ was as good a heel as he will ever be in his career. He was a heel there 100%. There were signs in the crowd that says, if Cena wins, we riot. Like, they were there to trash him. And boy, did they. It was easily the longest cash-in match in history. They went 20 minutes before Edge in his motorcycle helmet speared Cena and set up the 5-star frog splash for RVD to get the win. But it was just multiple reasons. It was RVD's first big championship win, I think, in WWE, other than like an IC belt. So that was really cool to see. They made him go from that to the ECW champion, which was really cool to see because there was the old ECW belt, not the silver one, but the old one. That was cool. It just felt special for so many reasons. You know, like it was the second ever, but it was also just they made the second ever just as important as when Edge first cashed it in at Cena at New Year's Revolution. It just felt important.
Yeah, so a number of things to talk about here, a number of connections. So obviously, there's not only is this the second cash in, but there's an obvious connection to the first cash in, as the person who first cashed in Money in the Bank was also involved in this match and highly involved in the decision. So there is that, cool connection to the original Money in the Bank holder. Then, the whole way that RVD got to this match is really interesting as well. Because if we look at not just the history of Money in the Bank, but if we look at the history of One Night Stand, this was the second One Night Stand pay-per-view that they had done. The first One Night Stand pay-per-view that they had done was RVD's idea. He was the one that suggested the pay-per-view to Vince McMahon, thinking that it was crazy, that it would never happen. And Vince saw the money in it. And then, of course, RVD gets injured and is unable to participate in that first One Night Stand. Yep. And so, I think a lot of what we got to see at the second One Night Stand, and even sort of the second coming of ECW as a brand, was all related to what had happened to RVD at the first One Night Stand and the fact that he was unable to participate. And so now the second One Night Stand, which again was his idea, was really built around the idea of him. And I think as far as Money in the Bank winners go, and this is not necessarily a thing that they do too much now, but you have to look at RVD as literally the coolest Money in the Bank winner, because he had the airbrushed Money in the Bank briefcase that he carried. Like, that was just cool. That was a cool thing to do. And, you talked about, Cena, the champion, being this ultimate heel. I mean, those fans, if they could have gotten their hands on him, would have killed him.
Oh,
I mean,
my God.
He threw his shirt into the crowd 3 times. And the one guy snotted all over it. The one guy wiped his butt with it and threw it back at him. I mean, the great thing about it was, and again, me not being a Cena fan, these are hard things for me to talk about, but like, for Cena to be willing to go into that environment and be that heel and play it up, I mean, that just speaks volumes about who John Cena is, his dedication to the craft, his knowledge that, hey, this is big money for everyone involved. Like, this is big business for us, and it's what's best for business. To go in there and just, be a part of that, work with Rob, who, we all know RVD, and we all know what RVD is capable of. And yet I still think there are times where RVD is underrated and doesn't get the amount of credit that he should, because he's an amazing athlete. He does things in the ring that are just, far and above what other people are able to do. So sometimes I don't think he gets enough credit, even though he's a Hall of Famer. We don't talk about his abilities enough. But this was just, to me, I think this was the one cash-in. If you look at all the cash-ins, this cash-in could be described as the perfect storm.
Absolutely.
RVD wins money. RVD wins Money in the Bank. One Night Stand is coming up. Cena's the champ. Cena is so hated by the ECW crowd. Edge is involved. There's just so many things that make this such a perfect cash-in. And I think, to your point, you said this was the longest cash-in match at 20. A cash-in that got that full amount of time.
Yeah. there weren't many, but like I said, it was a full match. It wasn't giving us like a run in and that was it. It was like they actually gave a match time.
Yeah.
I think the only other person to do that is I think John Cena.
Mm-hmm.
Who, when he cashed in, he announced his who he was going to face, and then that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, everything was just so great with this cash in. So, my number 2 is the same one. RVD cashes in on John Cena.
2 for 2.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was all about it. Just, I don't know. That pay-per-view to me, the first one night stand is really special because it's a fun show. But that second one night stand, I think honestly, for as much as the first one night stand was what it was, and it was such an incredible, moment for a lot of different reasons and for a lot of ECW fans, to me, I feel a bigger connection to the second one. And I think the second one to me is more iconic just because of what they're able to do with that cash in.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. It's time. It's the big
been
reveal.
Very
number one.
Very in sync so far. I'm surprised because this was literally a last minute topic. So I'm surprised. My number one, I've mentioned it several times on this show, and I don't think he gets enough credit. And I know his reign lasted all of like 2 minutes, but just the moment itself is what means more to me than the actual reign itself. And that's when Dolph Ziggler cashed in on Del Rio on Raw after Mania in 2013. Because Mania, the Raw to Mania always holds a special aura as it's the night after Mania, brings even more surprises than the show shows. It's a chance to capitalize on that massive crowd from all over the world to deliver for moments that would never be forgotten. And in my eyes, there may not be a single moment more well-remembered than the night Ziggler cashed in on his briefcase on an injured Del Rio to a raucous ovation. Just the roof, when he got that pin, the roof blew off. I've never heard a louder chant for Ziggler, I think, in his career than when he cashed in that briefcase that night.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just this is what made this simple cash in so impactful. The crowd at his back made Ziggler a bigger star in one night than he ever had been or ever would be again.
Yeah. So you had WrestleMania 29, which, WrestleMania 29 was such a huge WrestleMania to begin with, and to your point, I think that comes a lot from the crowd. That crowd was just unbelievable. That New Jersey crowd that was there carried over into the very next night. So that crowd was really just so hot, so into everything. And what really kind of paints a picture of this time in wrestling, the Monday Night Raws after WrestleMania always used to be this huge thing. Not just because like the Raw after Mania became such a big deal with surprises and all kinds of things happening, but it's also the holdover crowd from WrestleMania, because everybody that travels in for WrestleMania does not waste their time just to travel in for WrestleMania. They stay for Monday Night Raw, and that crowd is just different than any other crowd. However, these days I don't feel like we're getting that same crowd.
Not at all.
No. So this is a time period in wrestling when, you had that raucous crowd. And I think that the fact that it was Dolph Ziggler, because I think if anybody else had maybe held the Money in the Bank and cashed in that night, it might not have been, it would have been a huge ovation, but it might not have been as big, because I think people were hungry to see Dolph Ziggler succeed. I think people were hungry to see him get the credit that was due to him. He's a workhorse. He's great all the time. Wrestlers will talk about it, and some fans will talk about it, but I don't think he ever gets enough credit for how good he really is at what he does. And for the longest time, he simply wasn't getting the credit that was due to him. And I think it was this, again, to use the same term, it was a perfect storm of that hot WrestleMania crowd the night after WrestleMania, the fact that it's Dolph Ziggler and fans have wanted to see him, win the big one for such a long time. I think it all just kind of came together. And we can give some credit to Alberto Del Rio as well, because he was a believably hateable champion.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
You want to talk about a champion that really worked for and earned his booze. Like, he was the guy. I mean, here's a guy who ran over Santa Claus on Monday Night Raw.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, people forget that he did that dastardly thing. Like, he ran, and I mean, what was great about the night that he ran over Santa Claus was that, like, even Roberto Rodriguez wanted nothing to do with him. He's like, no, no way, brother. Like, but yeah, I mean, he was a really hateable champion, which is exactly what you want from a heel champion. I mean, I honestly, he had one of my favorite entrances of all time. Just, I loved his entrance theme. I loved when he would come out and the whole background would be like the mansion up on the hills, and he would drive out in the car. And I loved everything about his entrance. And part of it was that it was so over the top that it made you hate him more. But I loved his theme music. Like that.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably in my top 10 theme musics of all time from WWE. I loved it. But anyways, yeah, I think it all kind of fell together again into this sort of just perfect moment, this encapsulation of, wrestling at the time. Because WrestleMania 29 was a hot WrestleMania, let me tell you.
Yeah, I was there for that with my brothers. It was an amazing, amazing show. My very first Mania. I never forget it. We made signs for The Undertaker, where each of us had a sign. One was a number, one was a dash, and one was the 0.
Yeah.
So we all held it up when Taker came out.
It was very cool. Were you excited to see Punk that year?
Oh yeah, no, I was excited for the whole thing. Like, I wish they would have caught it on the live mic on the show, because I watched it back. But in our area where we sat, there were opposite chants of Taker and CM Punk, like, deafening around us.
Mm-hmm.
Opposite chants, and it was so cool. But when I watched it back, you didn't catch it on the mic because there were so many fans. But it was a cool moment that I got to live in and sit in, because like our crowd, our section was just hot for both sides, and it was really cool.
So I was at WrestleMania 25 in Houston. I saw Taker and Michaels live, which
that's cool.
A lot of people consider that to be the greatest Mania match of all time. However, I will say this. For having seen Michaels and Taker live, my favorite Taker match at WrestleMania is Punk and Taker. I thought the build up to that match was so incredible. And, one of the things that Punk was really upset about in his WWE career was that Punk and Taker was not the main event of WrestleMania 29. That was something that he was very vocal about, and he felt that they were the best match on the card. And I mean, I
agree.
I can't really disagree.
Seeing it live, I can't disagree, because the matches afterwards, in our eyes, were kind of boring. Like, that was like to us, that was the end of the show. Like we watched the rest of it. It was good, but like nothing topped that match after that. That was it.
Yeah, I can't disagree either. Because again, that's my favorite Taker match. I just felt that everything they did about that match was so good. The build up to it was great. I was very much a big fan of that version of Punk at the time. The Paul Heyman led Punk, and I very much enjoyed that whole thing. So yeah, so you have a crowd coming off of that going into Monday Night Raw, and yeah, just an incredible moment.
And you want to talk about a time period? You got to think about back then. Who was with Dolph Ziggler at that point? AJ Lee and Biggie Langston.
Yeah.
You had two up and coming, stars with Ziggler, who's also up and coming, and now look where they're all at. Ziggler is still one of the best modern workhorses of the era. You got Big E, who's not only been multiple time tag champion, but WWE champion one time, also because of a cash in. So like, there's always these moments that like get people to the next spot. Even though they were all at the time young, all three of them are now went on to do bigger and better things after they left their little group that they had.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool.
Let's hear your number one.
All right. So it is time for my number one, and I cannot say that I picked the same number one that you did.
Okay.
I will say that I did have a hard time because at one point, as I was narrowing down my list, that Dolph Ziggler cash-in was on my list at one point, for the very reasons that we talked about, because I thought it was, again, when we talk about monumental moments in people's careers, I mean, that was just, but again, so many great things about it, the crowd, all of these factors. So I almost had that one on my list. But my number one is the very first cash-in, the original cash-in, Edge cashing in on Cena at New Year's Revolution in 2006.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, again, this is the very first cash-in. This is a big deal. Edge wins Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 21, and we have no idea what this means. We have no expectations for it. We have no idea what's going on, and it was a very weird sort of, I guess, way to cash in, just because it did not necessarily become the norm. But you had Cena in this absolutely grueling Elimination Chamber match. Just when that Elimination Chamber match was over, Cena was slumped over on the mat in the corner, like
exhausted.
Oh, absolutely. And then here comes Vince McMahon strutting out with his power strut, oh, here we go. Raise the chamber, That's a terrible Vince McMahon impersonation, but
yeah,
I can do the walk really well. I just can't do the
voice.
No, I can't do the voice. But yeah, he comes out and he's like, "We're not done yet. We're not done. Raise the chamber." And then out comes Edge. His music hits. He hands the Money in the Bank briefcase to Vince, and then he and Lita make their way down to the ring. And this was important for a lot of reasons. Number one, I mean, obviously it's the first cash-in, so we're setting the bar kind of high here, because not only is it future Hall of Famer Edge, but a future Hall of Famer in John Cena as well, I'm sure. The champion at the time. I mean, these are two huge names. And again, just setting expectations. The fact that Cena was absolutely exhausted, and this is where Edge really earns the title of Ultimate Opportunist. Hitting the ring and just going at it. And again, this now sets an expectation, because the very first winner of Money in the Bank cashes in, wins the title match. So now we had a string of cash-ins where we continued to have people, every time they cashed in, you pretty much knew it was a guarantee that they were going to win the title. Because I think, didn't we go all the way to like Damien Sandow before we had somebody cash in unsuccessfully? Wasn't he the first one?
We had a pretty long stretch there where it was like an 80% chance that if someone won the Money in the Bank, they were going to win the belt at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if Damien was the first person to fail cash in.
Yeah, I believe he was. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, that first one just set the expectation and set the bar, fairly high. And again, we saw, just many people cash in and win. And like you said, you got to a point where it was, it was just a guarantee that they were going to win. So, yeah, I think that
actually the first one was John Cena himself. Oddly enough,
well, I mean, technically he was unsuccessful. He won the match. He won by disqualification, but he didn't get the title. So, I mean, technically his cash-in would have been successful because he won the match, but he didn't win the title. So I don't know. That's a weird kind of, like a weird kind of thing to have happen. I mean, I would go along with that. I would say that was an unsuccessful cash-in just because he didn't walk away with the title, even though he won the match. So I would be willing to agree with that. But Damien Sandow was another big one where, his cash-in was unsuccessful. Baron Corbin had an unsuccessful cash-in. So, there were some unsuccessful cash-ins, but by and large, there's a real expectation that, the person who cashes in is going to win the title. And that was all set in place by Edge. And, the Edge cash-in led to, I feel like that kind of led to really cementing not only his legacy as the Ultimate Opportunist, but also as the Rated R Superstar. Because you look at the next night on Monday Night Raw. What happened the next night on Monday Night Raw? Do you remember what he did?
Was that when he changed the belt?
He changed the belt, but that was also the live sex celebration.
Oh yeah.
So like this was like this was like really cementing this different sort of Edge.
And the whole Rated R Superstar being like legit Rated R.
Yeah.
For a
so
TV
definitely
show.
Definitely a big moment, not only for Money in the Bank, but a big moment in the career of Edge. So
no, absolutely.
Yeah, that for me. That's just I think there's a lot of history to that, and just as far as Money in the Bank goes, and just being the first one, I thought kind of set the tone for how everything was going to go. So. Yeah, it's interesting though, because we were really on a lot of the same wavelength here.
Oh yeah,
we're talking about different cash-ins. Even the ones you picked that I didn't, I had still considered them at one point. Like they were, 5.5 and 6 probably on my list by the time it was all said and done.
Yeah, it took everything in me to wean Kane out, but I mean, as much as I love my favorite wrestler, Kane, as I always will, it didn't feel as important when he cashed it in as all the other ones. So, fortunately, he had to get the boot.
Yeah, I understand. Well, so we've got Money in the Bank tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is going to be a little weird.
A little weird.
So, yeah, so that should be a fun time. I don't know who's going to win. I don't necessarily either one way or the other care who's going to win, as long as the show is entertaining. As long as the matches are good.
That's all that matters to me at this point. As long as the show entertains me, then I'm happy. Yeah. And the last 2 shows that they've had have actually been very entertaining and makes me happy.
Yeah. So I am happy that they are continuing the trend of Saturday pay-per-views. I think that's a great move on their behalf. I definitely like the Saturday pay-per-views much better.
Well, I definitely see there's going to be a more AEW versus WWE thing going forward for sure, because now that you have a Saturday Collision on Saturday and then you have AEW pay-per-views on Sunday, WWE can't dodge a show.
Yeah, certainly not.
They really can't. So they're going to have to start like legit going head to head without trying because they're not going to have a choice.
Yeah, and I think this will be where we really start to see some of the difference in AEW and WWE's model of how they do pay-per-views or premium live events, as WWE now calls them, because AEW is still on that traditional pay-per-view model, and I feel like when you know that Collision and a WWE premium live event are going to be on the same night, it's a much easier decision to watch the premium live event because you can do so with your, Peacock $9.99 subscription instead of having to dole out $50 for a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be interesting. I think where we may see some of the numbers, we might start to see some shifts in how AEW sort of views their pay-per-view model. At least I'm hoping. Forbidden Door is certainly an exception because I feel like Forbidden Door is definitely a show that, if I spend $50 on and then I see a show like that, I am not disappointed in the slightest.
Really?
However, I can't say that that's going to be the case with every AEW pay-per-view. I think Wembley will be another show.
That will be worth it for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that will. But I can't say on a regular basis, like an every month basis, that I could really, justify putting out that money all the time for AEW shows. Not that there's anything wrong with AEW pay-per-views, but I think that's pricing themselves out of the model now.
Well, I think I said it in an earlier episode that I think they just need to take Honor Club, combine AEW with Honor Club, add all of the back library from AEW to Honor Club with the old ROH stuff as well, and make that their streaming service. And you can have their PLEs on there for a fee, $10 or whatever it is, and you have your own small little streaming hub, and you're finally up to date on the modern way that people watch their events is through a service. Because, again, that model is an older model, like you said, that I think nowadays just doesn't work as well. It's worked for AEW for now, yes, but how many more years can they go doing this before they start getting, pushed to the back?
Yeah, because there's almost nobody that runs pay-per-views like that now. Even like most of your top-tier indie companies are either on some sort of service like Fight TV, or they're on like a streaming channel service like IWTV, things like that. I don't think they're going to be able to sustain that much longer. So another episode in the books. Interestingly enough, this is our 10th episode. We've been around for 10 episodes already. We have had 2 special guests
Lovely
so far.
Guests. Shout out to William and Larry Peace.
Yeah, so definitely go back and check those episodes out if you haven't heard them yet. We will be scheduling an interview. We will be rescheduling our interview with Kimberly coming up soon. So, of course, keep an eye out on socials for that. And the Opinion City train keeps rolling. Things are not slowing down in the slightest, and that leads us into next week's episode, which now that we've got 10 in the books,
super excited about.
Yeah, next week is going to be super exciting. So now that we've got 10 in the books, it's time to go upward and onward, and so we are going to be joined next week by a very good professional wrestler, a very good professional commentator. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be talking to the one and only Avery Good, professional wrestler.
Formerly known as Dasher Hatfield.
Yes, you've seen him on the indies. You love him, or you love to hate him, whatever the case may be. He is quite the heel these days. And so we are super, super excited to have him join us on Opinion City next week. So please make sure that you take some time to check that out. We are very excited to be having him on. And so with that in mind, if you want to find me online, I am at RealRalph316 on all the socials. So you can like me, follow me, you can twit at me, whatever you feel like doing. I love it all. So please find me on socials, hit me up, and let me know what you think about what we're doing here. Sean, where can people find you?
Find me at Parma Cheese on all socials, same as Ralph. Please reach out. I want to hear what you guys think about each episode and your opinions on each topic that we do each week. Also, where can they find the podcast, sir?
Well, this is some exciting news. This is really exciting. We have sort of outgrown our home on the Mancast Network socials. So we're still a part of the Mancast Network, but we've branched out a little bit. And you can now find Opinion City across the socials at Opinion City Pod. That's Opinion City POD. And please like, follow, subscribe, tell your friends about it, look us up online, rate the show, review the show, give us your opinions. We want all the love from the fans because we love you guys. It's been an exciting 10 episodes so far. We've had listeners not only across the country but across the world as well. We've had listeners checking in from places such as Ireland and China, apparently, and Canada as well. And just most recently, we've had some folks in the United Kingdom checking in. So Opinion City is making its way across the country and making its way across the world. So we are thankful for every single listener that we've had to this point in our first 10 episodes. And from here, it is just full steam ahead, keeping the train rolling. And just keep an eye out on our socials. Like I said, we've got Avery Good, professional wrestler, next week. And we've got some more guests coming up in the future. So definitely keep an eye out on the socials for those. And with that, I think it's time to sign off for this week. So Sean, thanks for another great episode.
Of course.
And we'll talk to you guys again next week.
Our new tag team name is the Rocket Strappers.
We're the Rocket Strappers, signing off.
This is also Ann here. You're listening to Opinion City Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Happy trails to you till we